both of these are powerful, moving documentaries that speak about so many of the topics, some of the issues that we as a nation, we as a culture have been grappling with and discussing so much this year. From certainly in this stretch between Memorial Day and Labor Day, as we saw thousands of people taking the streets around the country to talk about what this democracy should look like, who's being served and who's being underserved. And so I wanted to first start by letting everyone know who here is on the call with us. And so what I always, while I'm probably the one who's supposed to be doing the introductions, I always think it's better when people introduce themselves because I can combine it with a question as well. And so what I want to do is I want to go to all four panelists who we're talking about and briefly introduce yourself. And this is a question I always have. For the filmmakers, for those who worked on these films, talk about how you settled on this idea. What was the inception of your project? And for those who were featured in the film, what were you thinking when these people called you and said, let me follow you around with the camera for X amount of time? I'm always thinking that would be insane. So talk to me about your involvement, how you got involved in these projects yourselves, and now having seen the finished product, what you think the power and importance of them are. And so, Lisa, if you want to start.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really honored to be in conversation with all these beautiful Black faces. Thank you. My arms are around you. I am the producer, director of All in the Fight for Democracy. I collaborated on this project with Liz Garbus, who joined me as a producer and director also. The origin story of the project is 2 words for one fabulous person, and that is Stacey Abrams. Stacey Abrams came to us as filmmakers and shared her desire to use film as a medium to tell this history of voter suppression and to interrogate, the weaponization and how it's led us to this moment in time. But it's a moment that we have all seen from the inception of this country. So it is the team, it is the timeliness of the message, and it is the incredible platform of filmmaking that has brought me into this project.
Now, Desmond, you were in this piece. Tell me about your involvement, how you got involved in this documentary, and what you thought of it.
Yeah. So first of all, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. My name is Desmond Meade. I am the executive director of Florida Rights Restoration Coalition, and I'm proud to say a first-time author, right, of Let My People Vote. And it's been a project in the making for a couple of years now. But when I was first approached, there was a little annoyance on my part because, I am like so laser focused because, Florida is a huge state to deal with, and everything that could go wrong, it happens in Florida. And so I was like, man, another crew that want to follow, and how is it going to distract from my work? But then I heard those same 2 words that Lisa heard, right? Stacey Abrams. And that really just triggered something else in me because I was definitely a big fan of Stacey. Stacey was the one who actually wrote the nomination for me for Time 100. And also, the thing that I was struggling with the most was that I was a Black African-American man who was directly impacted. I'm a returning citizen who just got through leading one of the greatest civil rights victory in the country, and definitely the greatest in Florida. But there was little said about that. And most of the focus was on other people that didn't look like me, right? And I thought that there was a huge story to be told. And, if Stacey was involved in it, I knew that some of that story would get told and it would heighten the awareness about the tremendous work that we're doing here in Florida, especially, and I'm a little biased on this, but especially believing that, in my lifetime, I have not seen a person get into the White House without winning the state of Florida. And so with the importance of Florida, I thought that, we didn't get enough attention that we deserved. And this documentary was something that could definitely elevate our cause and help actually liberate returning citizens here in the state.
Perfect. Now we'll head over to Samantha.
Hi, I'm Samantha Knowles. I'm the director of Tangled Roots. And Tangled Roots really came about because I had wanted to make a film about Black hair discrimination for a few years. When I was 15, almost 15 years ago, there was a rule in my school handbook. I went to a Catholic school upstate, and it banned dreadlocks and it banned cornrows for men. And I had hair like this. I had braids. I didn't have cornrows. I wasn't a male student, but it still felt like it targeted me. But there was no language around Black hair discrimination the way that there is now. And as I started to see that language emerge, as I started to see these bills being filed around the country, I really had this urge to make a film about it. But I didn't know what that would look like. I had no idea what that would entail. And I just started researching, and I found this op-ed written by Attica Scott, Representative Scott's daughter. And it told the story of this kind of battle that the two of them had won at her high school. Her high school had a rule very similar to mine. She was also 15, Ashanti was. And it banned, natural hairstyles, protective styles. And Ashanti and her classmates, sort of led by Representative Scott, really, really kind of created this incredible activism that overturned the rule. And at the very end of and I was like, oh, this is a great story. This could be the focus of my film. At the very end, she was like, oh, also my mom is a state representative, and she's filing a bill to ban this kind of discrimination statewide. And I was like, this has to be my film, for a documentarian, that's kind of documentary gold. Like, it's an active story. It's something I could follow. I started digging, before I got in touch with Representative Scott, I started digging into her. I don't know if she knows this, but I just was amazed by what I found just online. I learned that she was the first Black woman to be elected to the state legislature in 20 years. She's currently the only Black woman. She has this rich history of organizing and activism. She comes from the community. And so I was just kind of like floored by her. And I just sent her a cold email. I just emailed her and I was like, can I make a film about you? And that's kind of how the whole relationship started.
Now, Representative Scott, you get this email about someone wanting to make a film about you, and you didn't delete it or send it to spam. You seemingly responded. What happened? How did you get involved? And for folks who haven't seen the film or the documentary, talk a little bit about the arc of what happens over the course of this documentary.
Definitely. So thank you so much for the opportunity to be part of this conversation. When Sam reached out to me, I thought, okay, so somebody actually wants a positive story out of Kentucky. I've got to respond to this. And then I thought, okay, well, if you want to highlight the work that my daughter and other student activists did as they found their own strength and agency to change a school policy, that's fantastic. I never thought it would grow into, so we want to follow you as you work on getting this bill passed because, again, we're Kentucky and folks often write off that we even have Black people in our state, let alone want to do a documentary that's about Black people and our advocacy and serving in office and building relationships across the Commonwealth in Appalachian, rural Western Kentucky, which is where we were when we were in Mayfield during the documentary. So, it was important to me to say yes to Sam, please please come to Kentucky. And Sam came to Kentucky many times, followed us all across the state, to the state capitol, the People's House in Frankfurt, as we were talking to my colleagues about the bill and why it was important. The legislative body, we have 100 members in the House, 92 are white, 7 are Black, and 1 is an Indian immigrant. And so it was important for Sam to see that for herself, and then to go to Western Kentucky and see us in conversation there about you have the power to get your elected official to sign on as a co-sponsor of this bill. So use that power. So I'm grateful to Sam for being part of those conversations with us and for putting the work that we're doing here in Kentucky into the documentary.
Now, I want to remind folks who are watching at home, you're all at home, I know you are. So for those who are watching at home, I want to remind you that I would love to include some of your questions for both Representative Scott, for Desmond, as well as for the filmmakers. And so you can start setting those in and queuing those up at any time. In fact, the sooner you start sending them, the fewer of my questions you have to deal with. But I wanted to kind of kick this conversation off with both films. There's a through line, and I think a connective tissue between the two of them. In both cases, we're talking about a subsection of the population who hasn't always been represented, who at very often, at many junctures throughout our history, has been oppressed, overlooked, taken advantage of, right? In neither case are we talking exclusively about Black people. Right, we are talking about groups that include a lot of Black people, whether it be people who wear protective hairstyles or people who are returning citizens. But in both cases, we're talking about sections of people who haven't always seen themselves represented. I was hoping we could all talk, and anyone can jump in on this, about the importance of telling stories and giving platform to people who might otherwise be underrepresented. Not everyone would seek out to tell a story about hair discrimination. Not everyone would think, how we should spend our time, much less our life's work. It should be about making sure that people who went to prison can still vote, right? What's the importance in the society we live in, the democracy we live in, to be telling stories of these types of marginalized groups?
Wow. Representative Scott, you want to go first or you want me to go first?
You go ahead, Mr. Meade.
Yeah, because I'm like riled up and I'm ready to go, because when you talk about the importance, Wes, we can't just limit it to returning citizens being able to vote. Let's talk about the big issues that our country is dealing with right now. When you talk about Ahmaud Arbery being gunned down, right, in broad daylight, and the prosecutor taking over 70 days to press charges against the people that murdered him, right? What group of people know better the power of the prosecutor than returning citizens? People who have faced a stacking of charges, people who have been forced to take guilty pleas when they weren't even guilty, just for the sake of getting out of prison, or people who have had excessive bail placed on them so they end up losing their jobs and they can't support their family. But returning citizens, when you talk about Greg Floyd, right? Who are the group of people that understand the violence that is perpetrated upon people by law enforcement, or the over-aggressive arresting of individuals than returning citizens? And so for so many years, George Floyd didn't just happen. Breonna Taylor just didn't happen. Ahmaud Arbery just didn't happen. It's been going on for centuries. But the people who have had these atrocities perpetrated upon them have always been blocked out. And no one wanted to take our word for it when we were saying we were crying police brutality for many years. But now that, particularly here in Florida, that Amendment 4 was passed and have even spurred a movement across the country to expand voting rights to people with felony convictions. What you're seeing now are those very same issues now are being elevated to a national level, and people like me who have been silent for so long are now looked upon as the the subject matter experts in this, and number two, a constituency group that can impact elections in such a way to really bring about the transformative change that we've been yearning for so many years, in the form of electing new prosecutors, electing new judges, sheriffs, and people that appoint police chiefs, as well as, guess what, 2020, electing a president to lead our country. And so our stories are vitally important because it is the stories of the communities that have been marginalized for so long through institutionalized racism and state-sanctioned violence.
Mr. Meade, thank you so much for that, because you're exactly right. The power of the vote has the ability to truly transform our lives. Right here in Kentucky, we have more than 200,000 people who have not had their right to vote for more than a decade, who have not had the right to elect more people like me, more Black women in office, more Latinx women in office, more Asian women in office, to lift up these issues that we're talking about today, like hair discrimination, because it hasn't been seen as important by the majority white legislative body in our state capitol. And so, yes, that right to vote makes a difference in what issues are lifted up as the issues of importance to people. And yes, it is important to folks that I serve that, for example, one of the Black women that Sam and I spoke to, at her job, was told that her braids were too fashion forward. Like, what in the world does that even mean? Your braids are too fashion forward. You got to change your hair to fit into this environment. You should be able to show up as your whole authentic self and do your job. You should not be told that you have to change the way you look to make white people comfortable. And so that's the reality that we face. And that's why I filed this bill to ban discrimination based on natural hair. And I'm grateful for the platform of the documentary, because it shows people that when you have a legislative body that's mostly white, they are the people that can prevent bills like mine from ever being heard. I've been serving in our state legislature for 4 legislative sessions now, and not once have any of my bills been heard, not even in committee for discussion. And for the past 2 legislative sessions, not one of the members of our Black Legislative Caucus have had their bills heard, not even in committee for discussion only. So we've got to change the very face of political power in our local and state and federal offices if we want our issues to be heard.
Now, a question for Lisa and Samantha. How do you go about telling stories like this, right? When we talk all the time about the need to provide platform to people who otherwise their stories aren't being told or being heard. But what is it like to go into people's lives, document their fights, the back and forth between how much you put in, what you hold back, how you frame things? What was the process like here, and what do you think broadly about as more people set out to tell stories like this? What are some of the ethics around and best practices for how these stories can be told?
You want to go first, Samantha?
Sure. I feel like it's really important. I feel like I always have this process where a lot of my films, because they are about the community that I'm part of, the larger community, the Black community, I really kind of go in, for me personally, from this place of like, I experienced this thing as a Black woman. I wonder what that's about. And I go in, and I really lead with that. I really lead with my personal experience. And then when I finally kind of latch onto a story and I find a subject like Representative Scott, I really kind of lead. I really look to her to kind of lead me. I think a lot of, I didn't know any, and Representative Scott knows this at this point, but I didn't know anything about really about the legislative process. I didn't know, I wasn't on the ground in Kentucky. I'm from, the Northeast. I didn't know of personal stories that sort of illustrated her fight. Dina Johnson, the woman we feature in the film, was somebody that Representative Scott brought to us. And I really kind of looked to her to kind of guide me through this process. And I thought that was really important because it was a story, yes, that was largely about like this, this thing that felt personal for me and that I think felt personal for a lot of people, but it was a story about Representative Scott's fight. And so and we capture a fight that that isn't necessarily won in the classic sense. And so there was a lot of, checking in with her and, I'm sure I drove her crazy, but I think there was a lot of checking in with her and being like, how are you feeling? How are you like every week, like, how are you feeling about this? I feel a certain type of way. I feel like this is happening. How are you feeling about this? So it was really, really allowing myself to be led by her and taking her cues in a lot of ways.
A big part of what I do as a documentary filmmaker is I'm bearing witness. I'm bearing witness to history, armed with facts in a time of great disinformation. And what I love about the crafting of our stories is that, yes, we have an internal architecture that we rely on for the storytelling. We have tremendous historical research. We have archival in our film, but we also have verite sequences. And that's how we were able to spend time with Desmond and to really access his journey through his eyes, through his community. So whether it's being on the bus tour, at church, or at the court when returning citizens were being emotionally granted the return of the franchise. Those are the moments of discovery which really propel the empathetic journey that we hope to take one on. When you're working particularly on a film that is based on history and precedent, what's important is to find the present storylines, because with voter suppression, it is not past tense. It is active, it is alive, and it is a battle that we are engaged with now. Liz, my fellow director, we always talk about how it's a monster movie. You think you've cut the head off. We thought we cut it off, with the promise of reconstruction. No. Violence, intimidation, poll taxes, literacy taxes. Bam, we thought we cut the head off with the Civil Rights Act of 1965. We definitely got our heads cut off in 2013 with the passage of, with the decision in Shelby County v. Holder. And certainly 2016, we were cutting heads off the monster again. And so it's so important, in the storytelling to lean into the history and the facts, but also through the verite, be able to access a very active present.
Now, one of the, go ahead, Desmond, jump in.
Wes, yeah, I mean, because I was listening to Samantha and I was listening to Lisa. And one of the things that I really, truly appreciate, especially with Lisa, because I was in that project, was that I think it went beyond just telling a story, right? Right. There's a lot of people that can tell a story, but how you were able to be so creative, Lisa, and really humanize me and humanize so many others. And I think it's in the humanization of people that allows the streets, right, to actually accomplish the things that they want to accomplish and allow people to really to come together. It was something that we did with Amendment 4 in humanizing and connecting with people along the lines of humanity. And I mean, all in, I think did a masterful job of really connecting with a person's humanity, even if that person could have been a conservative person looking at this. All in is not just for progressive viewers, right? It's for all people to look at, and all people have the potential of really connecting deeply with that story and standing up and fighting back against these oppressive systems. And so I really wanted to point that out and appreciate that in Samantha's piece as well as your piece, Lisa.
Thank you so much.
You know, one of the questions I want to ask, someone alluded to this earlier, right? But this is an all-Black panel. This is, and in this moment especially, there are a lot of probably white viewers, filmmakers, film writers, people who are in this space who think, yes, it's important to be telling stories like this. What advice would you give for people who themselves are perhaps not in the communities that they're trying to depict? Because I'm not necessarily one who thinks you have to be of a community to write about it. But that said, that there's clearly and obviously some steps you want to make sure you're taking to be respectful of the stories you're telling and make sure you're understanding things contextually and fully. And so what would you all say to the Emmy and Oscar winning filmmakers who are watching this, who are going, all right, I want to do something on Black people next? what should they know? What should they be thinking?
They do what Lisa didn't do, right? Because, and I find not with all, but some white storytellers, they really want to focus on what crime did you commit. They want to highlight, you know, the bad things or the supposedly negative things, you know, and craft a story around that. Right, rather than crafting a story around my humanity or crafting a story around, you know, what I've been able to accomplish after I made my mistakes, right? And so I think that sometimes people tend to profile, and they may have the best intentions, but somehow or another they subconsciously want to profile and want to stick to that stereotype that they used to for African Americans or even people that are directly impacted. That's just my 2 cents.
Well, I think as when people are looking at the who and the why of the story, they have to look at their teams and do they have members who can contribute with a unique perspective to that interrogation. You know, we're not looking to tell surface stories. We're looking at the 360 of how we show up as humans. And I think that's, you know, an unfortunate space that we're living in now, where we're hearing dog whistles, we're hearing winks and nods, we're hearing language that is triggering decades or centuries of stereotypes that have nothing to do with who we truly are as Black, brown, poor, young people. And if anything, this is a time for us as filmmakers to put together teams that will go beyond those easy to lean into stereotypes and really have embedded engagement with the subjects and with great sensitivity to the stories.
I just want to affirm that because for me, what Sam did that was important is she valued our relationship. Like she said, she was always checking in every single week. How are things going? How are you feeling? She respected our state. She didn't come looking for the typical narrative of Kentucky and Appalachia and rural communities. She didn't do that at all. She was very clear that this is your story and you need to tell it the way that it makes sense for you as a Black person in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. Then I believe you have to keep it real. Like Sam was very clear that, yep, I'm gonna go to the school where you are with little kids and talking to kids about hair discrimination. She didn't back down from that. And she said, yep, I'm going to drive with you 3 hours to Western Kentucky and talk to some Black folks at church at their Black History Month program, because that's what we do. That's how we build here in our state. It goes back to what Mr. Meade said, like Florida, Kentucky is a long state. And so, it takes a while to travel from one end to the next, but she did it. And she did it because it was important to do and to tell a story when you're trying to pass a piece of statewide legislation. You can't just tell the urban stories of Lexington and Louisville. You got to go to the hollers as well and tell those stories. So I believe that if someone's watching a filmmaker who's thinking, I need to be telling more Black stories, then you need to know you got to come in with respect. You got to build relationships and you got to keep it real.
I have to also say with Sam's film, one thing I really so appreciated was the balance of love and intention. in the storytelling. It's really fabulous.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, one thing I wanted to, and I'm going to remind folks again, audience, please keep getting your questions in. We've got a few coming, and so please start typing them in, because I'm already running out of my good ones. These folks are just answering all the questions before I can ask them. But I want to go back to Desmond and to Representative Scott, because the fights you all are engaged in, the movements you all are working in the documentaries are not over. They're ongoing, even after the filming stopped, even present day. I'm sure you all stepped away from work you were doing to come have this conversation. Can you talk to folks about, in the spaces you're working and operating, what's the status of things today? What are you fighting for today?
I'm happy to start, Mr. Meade, if that's okay with you. All right, I'll go ahead and start and just say that one of the things that Sam and I kept checking in about is that it didn't look like the bill was going to go anywhere. And I just kept saying to her, I don't think you have a story here, because most, not most, but many documentaries that I watch, there's a yay, we won at the end. And I was like, we don't have that story. So I'm not sure if you want to keep going. And she was like, no, it's important for us to tell the story of what these fights are like. And there's not always the big win at the end, but you keep doing the work, you're building momentum, you're sustaining the energy, and that's what's happening right now. So we didn't give up. We're coming right back, have already pre-filed the bill to ban discrimination based on natural hair. Our legislative session begins in January 2021, and we're gearing up to keep pushing for this bill to be heard in committee and be passed by the legislature. So that's where we are. We're not giving up. We're not backing down. We, of course, look at our legislature and we see that, there are 8 of us that are Black and Indian immigrant, and then you got 92 people who are white, and we're not going to allow them to have power, domination, and control literally over our bodies. And how we wear our hair is a part of our body. So we're going to keep up this fight. We're not giving up.
Well, that inspired me. But listen, we passed Amendment 4 that created a pathway for 1.4 million Floridians to be able to vote. We had a legislature that enacted laws that required now the payment of legal financial obligations before someone could actually register to vote. And that impacted a little over half of the 1.4 million people that was liberated by Amendment 4. We have, our number one goal is that in spite of the politicization, in spite of whatever legislation or litigation is out there, what we're most concerned about is that people, the lives of real people, are not lost in this fight. And we have been really pushing back and making sure that we're elevating people above politics and focusing on those returning citizens. We've been able to raise over $25 million to help those 774,000. And out of them, we've been able to alleviate those financial barriers of over 40,000 people. We've been able to register over 67,000 returning citizens. And we now have on the voter roll over 150,000 people with previous felony convictions. And we're still pushing forward. And our approach is that, matter of fact, we're having a huge statewide event on the 24th, which is this Saturday. And in over 23 states across the country, there are going to be returning citizens actually standing in solidarity. And it's a term that we use on the streets called clapping back. And what that is that's how we respond when people try to intimidate us, when people try to suppress our votes, when people try to discourage our votes. We're demonstrating to the powers that be that we as returning citizens, as people who have faced incarceration, in my case, drug addiction, homelessness, and all of those other things, that we don't scare easy. All right. And so those intimidation tactics that they're trying to employ, only thing it's going to do is make us have a stronger resolve to not only show up and vote, but to bring our family and our friends. And that's how we're responding. And that's been our approach, that every time, you have a group of people, in our case, the state of Florida and our governor, that insist on forcing people to choose between putting food on their kids' table or voting. When we have systems like that, how we're going to respond to that is by just celebrating democracy even louder and encouraging even more people and just keep going at it and letting them know that we're going to take their obstacles and turn them into opportunities. What they mean to be setbacks for us just became opportunities for us to step up. And I do believe that even in the darkest hour, like when I was homeless on the street, I'll never forget this lady told me that the darkest part of the night is right before dawn. And so even as we face this darkest hour in our country, that we're holding on to the hope that emerging out of these ashes of despair is going to be a renewed phoenix of hope that charts a new course to a new democracy, not the old one, because the old one wasn't working that well anyhow, especially not for us, but for a new democracy. And we do believe that at the center of it all are the very same people who were despised, who were overlooked, who were forgotten, who had knees on their necks for decades, and now they're the ones that's going to help usher us on into this new beginning. And so that's where we're at with our efforts. Like I'm on a bus right now, traveling the state of Florida, energizing folks for the 24th. And you know what? I got to share this. How about we're meeting people 60, 70 years old who has never been able to vote before, but now have their voter identification card and is voting in their very first election. I'll be voting in my very first presidential election ever in my life, right? And we're having people whose dying wishes was to be able to vote. Not to meet you, Wes, even though you're a big-time celebrity, right? But their dying wish was not to go to Disney World or to visit an exotic place. But we ran into a young lady who the doctor gave her 6 months to live. 6 months. And all she wanted to do was to be able to vote, which leads to what Lisa and Samantha, really the depths of what they're saying, actually, and I've seen it in All In, it transformed, it transcends the partisan politics that's causing the problems, that it takes us to a place that speaks to our humanity, right? And a place where we all can agree that as human beings, that we deserve to be treated with dignity and respect, and we deserve to have our voices heard. We deserve to have a say in how our democracy, how our country is ran. And that's what voting does. It does more than just Democrat or Republican. It's about saying that I am, that I exist and I count. And so that's what we're championing. And in spite of the oppositions, I'm happy, I'm excited, because I know that positive energy and that love that powers us will overcome it all.
Representative Scott, can you talk about where things stand with you? And also, one of the audience questions was, can you talk about your involvement in the Briana Taylor case? What's going on in Kentucky still? What's the mood on the ground? Obviously, the nation has been watching this terrible incident, and then what seems like the lack of accountability for the officers involved. And I know you've been on the front lines of that fight.
Yeah, so I appreciate that question, and I appreciate Mr. Meade for saying her name. We are continuing to seek justice for Briana Taylor, her family, and her community. We are very clear that has not happened yet, and we are not going away. This is a sustained movement. We've been out on the ground for 147 days since Thursday, May 28th, fighting for justice for her. More than 700 people have been arrested for protesting here in Louisville, and not one person has been arrested for her murder. So we know that we cannot give up. We cannot stop. We are turning our protest into advocacy for public policy. I have filed Briana's Law for Kentucky to end no-knock warrants across the Commonwealth, and our youngest activists who are leading this movement have signed on as community co-sponsors, and they've also said they want to turn the protest into policy and into politics. So they're looking to run for office in 2022 because they are very clear at just really speaking to what Mr. Meade has lifted up about the power of our vote, that again, if we want to really change policies at the local, state, and federal level. We have to change who is in office, and they are ready to do that work. And as a state representative, I am ready to support them in that. So that's where we are. We're still fighting for justice. We're trying to get a new special prosecutor on the case. We've got 2 grand jurors who have asked to speak out. That tells you something about the complete and utter failure of the Attorney General when you have grand jurors who want to do something that's unprecedented in this country. We had a grand juror who's been told that they can speak, and so they've been speaking to let us know that they were not presented with all of their options and that justice was indeed not served. So every single day we learn something new, and it continues to motivate us to keep fighting.
Now, a question for the filmmakers. What did you learn? Was there anything shocking, surprising, enlightening for you about these topics as you made them as filmmakers? You know, you had to be researchers, you had to piece stuff together, you had to tell a story, you had to do the journalistic work of understanding. What did you learn through this process that folks would be would gain from hearing?
Well, not that much in a way, because the history is such that from the inception of our country, the concept of who we the people are has always been seen through a very limited purview. Women, indigenous people, people of African descent, we were not part of the preamble. And the history of progress and then retrenchment, you know, we see playing out over hundreds of years. But if there's one thing that did surprise me, it was in 2013. Is the Shelby County v. Holder decision, which struck the preclearance in 9 states that had voting rights protection. And hours after this decision, the laws, the strict voter ID laws rolled out. Like the seeds had been planted for a long time and they were just waiting. We saw Texas, we saw North Carolina. And so that speaks to how organized the opposition is and how we have to become equally vigilant and organized in our fight.
I think in making Tangled Roots, I think quite literally I learned about everything that I could about the legislative process, the TikTok of it. I knew about it kind of generally, but I think I had just from having to ask Representative Scott, you know, over and over. So what happens next? And then where does it goes to committee, and that's what, you know, then you have a hearing. So quite literally, that's what a lot of what I learned. What I think making the film for me underscored, and what I think it will, I hope it underscores for viewers, is how important that legislative process is, and how you know, a lot of people talk about this, especially over the past few, you know, elections that we've had, but just the importance of local, you know, leaders and local elections. And that I've never, you know, I got to follow the life of a bill that was so deeply directly connected to me and to so many people around the country. And I think that I knew that intellectually, but to see that and to see how it could directly affect all of these people was really powerful. And I hope the film, you know, underscores that for viewers as well. I think I also, you know, kind of on an emotional level, you know, the film ends in a way where the big battle wasn't won, but the smaller battle kind of was. And I think, you know, not to sound cheesy, but I think for me, the film really underscored the importance of those small battles. I think what Representative Scott says at the end of the film is it's subtle, but it's so powerful. She says, I hope I get this right. I used to have it memorized, but she said, for Black people, the battles are never easily won. And I think, you know, that's really, really powerful. And I think whenever I watch the film, it re-inspires me. And so I think, you know, that's part of something that I learned as well.
Now, as the last question, as we approach the end of the hour, I wanted to ask Desmond and Representative Scott. The election is just 2 weeks away. What is your message to folks in terms of how they make sure their vote is counted, their voice is heard, and what people can do wherever they live to make sure that they and their neighbors are not facing these structural impediments to their ballot box and their participation in democracy?
Representative Scott, you want to go first or you want me to go first?
You go ahead, Mr. Meade. You got it.
Well, let me tell you, it's one of those questions I want to dive into, Wes. You asked some real good questions, man. I give you kudos for that.
I appreciate it.
Because when you talk about what message do I have for people, man, when you look at all in, man, you get a glimpse of the sacrifices that our ancestors made. I mean, what you've seen people who knew that they were facing death, but still risked that to just go out and register to vote, right? And then they had to do it all over again just to go out and vote, right? And here we are. We can register in the comfort of our home, right? And if you're in a state like Florida, you can even vote from the comfort of your home. You could mail in your ballot. And so understanding that there were so many people that risk certain death, right, just so we can have this opportunity. Man, I tell you, when I brought those spirits of my ancestors with me when I voted for the first time in over 30 years during the primary election, let me tell you, I finally understood, Lisa, I understood that, man, what I was getting ready to do was a sacred act, that I was walking on sacred ground when I was in that polling location. And when I was actually voting, that I was committing a sacred act, right? And because of the sacredness of that right to vote, the one that really speaks to my humanity more than anything else, right? That I understood that, number one, that politicians had to put some respect on my vote, right? But not only that, I had to put some respect on my vote and not just give it away or allow it to rest dormant, right? Because the sacrifices that was made, right, only manifests itself, right, through power when we exercise that right to vote. If we stay at home, if we do not participate in the selection, then we're defiling the sacrifice and the sanctity of that vote. And then last but not least, you know, I know that there's so many people that we've been crying for years about people not listening to our issues and not elevating the things that are important to us. But what I tell even the young folks is that no one could take care of your issues if they don't even know that you're there, right? And they're not going to know that you're there unless you show up to the polls. And so I tell people that you exercise that power to vote. And you got to know it's a power. And even if you don't realize it's a power, just fake it like it's a power, because it had to be valuable, or otherwise there would be so many people trying to take away from you. Look at All In. Man, they went above and beyond. And if people are investing that much resource to prevent you from voting, there must be some intrinsic value in that right to vote. And until you recognize what that is, you still need to hold on to it and make sure that you go vote. One day you will realize how important that is.
Representative Scott, I want to give you the last word of the panel.
Everything that Mr. Meade just said, and I will add to it that when I'm talking to folks and I know they're looking at their ballots and they're saying, so you want us to vote for another white person at the national level, another white person at the state level, another white person at the local level, I remind them that I defeated a 34-year incumbent who was a white man. And if they had not voted for me, I wouldn't be in this seat right now. So we have work to do. I remind them that Briana Taylor cannot vote, so we must cast our vote for her. So that is all that I have to say. If that's not enough for you, then I'm not going to be able to convince you to vote.
This has been such an amazing conversation. Lisa, do you want to jump in real quick?
I just want to share that for those people who might be confused about how to check your registration, how to become a poll worker, we've created a really dynamic website called All In voting. All of those resources are there. There are curriculums for college and high school students on history and civics, and I welcome people to visit there and make use of these resources.
Lisa, can you say that website one more time?
allinforvoting.com.
There we go, allinforvoting.com. We've got 2 amazing documentaries I hope folks check out. And everyone on this panel, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom for this conversation. And thank you again.